Hey, welcome to the Busy Gardener channel. We're out here today. I've got these trees in these pots that need to be planted. So today we're going to look at how to plant trees the right way. I know a lot of questions are, how do you put a tree in the ground so that it ends up giving you what you want it to do? You want it to grow up healthy and big, give you lots of fruit, and that starts with how you plant it. So let's take a look at a few things. The orchard is full of a bunch of potted trees that have been sitting here for a few months. One of them I'm having to replace this dead Pettingill apple. It's not clear to me why it died. It just failed several months ago, and I bought a replacement ghost apple, kind of an interesting one. Let's see how it grows. So anyway, we're going to talk about a few things like how deep do you plant your tree? Where do you plant it? What type of soil? What do you need to pay attention to? So, and how big should the hole be? All of this stuff. Let's take a look. So there are a few things that you want to be aware of. First and foremost is before you plant anything, you want to get an idea of what kind of soil you have. So as you see here, the soil that we have here in this part of our yard, the orchard, is really good, has some good organic material in it. You can do this like soil compaction thing if there's some more moisture in here. You see how it's kind of forming and then falling apart even without much moisture in it? That's a good balance. This is pretty good soil. If you have something that doesn't do that, you'll want to look at what the different remedies to that are. Like if it's too sandy, then it'll fall right apart, or if it's got too much clay in it, then it'll stay compacted and it won't fall apart. Both of which can cause issues. One, with soil that's too sandy, the water will just drain through too quickly. If it's got too much clay in it, then it won't drain at all. And so you want to test that. Another thing to do is when you dig your hole, if you're not quite familiar with what to do, how it is your soil drained, you dig a hole in your yard and you dump like a gallon of water in that. And just come back, 5 minutes later. Is that gallon gone? How quickly did it go? Maybe come back a couple minutes later and get an idea. You want soil that is going to be moist, but doesn't just turn into a little bathtub for trees. That drowns them. One of the top things you can do to kill your tree is to overwater it. And so if your soil isn't draining, that's a big issue. So what do you do if your soil isn't draining? We have a part of our yard in the orchard up here where the soil just doesn't drain at all. It's really silty. It does create like a big bathtub effect, and I've planted avocados in there 3 times. And each time they failed because I haven't planted them high enough. So if you're having a problem with drainage, if you don't have fast enough drainage, then what you want to do is you want to plant your trees above grade. So maybe dig a very, very shallow hole, just a few inches. And when you put your your tree there, you want to just mound soil. So you're essentially bringing the soil level up with better soil. And that way the tree doesn't drown and it has plenty of room for the roots to go out. And if the roots want to go down into the soil, they can. But that way you're planting it above and the tree is going to be able to breathe. Okay, so what I've done here is I've dug a hole about 2 times the size of the potted plant that I have. This potted tree, this ghost apple tree, had been in the pot for a while, and so the roots got a little bit root bound. So you notice maybe here that I've disturbed the roots. I've kind of teased them out, and I may continue to break up some of the soil. You can do it with your hand or use it with like a little trowel or one of those small little hand rakes. But see those little fine roots? When I fill the soil in around it, they're going to now go looking for good soil to do, to grow into, and that's what you want. Another thing that I do here in my orchard is I do this close planting, so that way I've got 3 different trees. And so the way that I plant this tree in the hole is going to depend on where I want the branches to go. In this case, I don't want the branches to grow toward the center of the tree or the center of the grouping. I want them to grow out. So you may notice here that if you look above, that I've got branches coming out, none growing toward the center. They're all growing out of the tree. So looking at the orientation of your branches is really important. I might rotate this just a little bit. How deep do you plant your tree? Well, most trees are grafted onto a specific type of rootstock. Whoa, there's a Japanese beetle, almost ate my brain. So what you want to look for is this graft point here. Do you see that? See how there's a really obvious graft right here? That's what we want to look for. there's a graft. This is where the ghost apple in this case has been grafted onto a M111 rootstock. And so you want to always plant, you want to make sure that this graft is always above the soil level. You never want the soil level to creep up above that, because that will kill your tree. Okay, so I've got my hole dug out. I've scraped off the soil for the roots there. Now I'm going to use the soil that I dug out of this hole to fill in the space around it. Now you've noticed that I've made sure that this is standing in the direction that I want. This is really important. The angle that you plant this is going to really determine the angle that your tree takes. So you want to make sure that your tree is upright in the direction that you want. With the branches, this is the time to look at this stuff last minute. If this is all looking good, it's nice and straight, the branches are going out in the directions that you want. Now you're ready to cover this with mulch and then water it in. If you checked out my video on mulching yet, I'm going to do a little bit right now, but you should really check that out so that way you can see all the ins and outs of mulching. Okay, so what we're looking for right now is a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch. What that's going to do is it's going to keep the soil moist. It's going to keep the moisture in there. It's going to regulate the temperature of the soil, which isn't going to dry it out or stress your tree as quickly. Mulch is one of the top things you can do for your fruit trees to keep them really low maintenance and doing what you want them to do. Now watering this in is going to do something really important. As the water goes in, it's going to help the soil to settle, and it's going to force out all those air pockets that are in there, so that way the roots are making a really good connection with the soil around it. So be sure to water in after you plant it. That's the last thing we're going to do with this tree right now. Now I want you to not be worried if after, you notice a couple of weeks after you plant your tree, if all of a sudden some of the foliage starts coming off. It's really natural for a tree to be stressed during the replanting process. The roots get disturbed and it may shed some leaves. Don't freak out if that happens. Keep an eye on your tree, but you should start to see some new growth develop. So something really important is to plot out where you're going to have your trees. That's another consideration. Your planting site, for example, that emerald drop pluot and this sweet treat pluery are both pollinated by the Santa Rosa plum, so I'm putting them nearby, so the bees are going to jump right from the Santa Rosa and pollinate these guys right next to it. And see, just a little aside here, I was walking by and I see that my Flavor Grenade pluot has a bunch of fruit on there. Look at this beautiful one. Flavor Grenade pluot, they hang on the tree for like 6 weeks, so you have time. Even when they're slightly unripe, they're still really sweet and really tasty. And the more yellow and reddish they get, the tastier they are. You can't get something like this in the store, just so good. Delicious. So I went out and I have my Sweet Treat Pluery, which is a plum cherry hybrid, and I went and bought its friend, Candy Heart Pluery, and they're pollinators of each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant these together in one hole, where they're going to be about 2.5 to 3 feet apart from each other on center. Now you'll notice that one of these, my Sweet Treat, is in a 5-gallon, and Candy Heart is in a 15-gallon. It's a much larger tree, larger caliper, and so because the sun comes in on a southern facing thing, that's also when you're planting trees in a close planting. I'm going to do a video on close planting, but in short, you want the smaller, less vigorous tree to be on the southern southwest facing. So of these two, the smaller one is going to be on the south so that it doesn't get shaded out. I'll show you an example of what I mean with the Santa Rosa plum, the huge one back here, and what I'm trying to do with pluot right behind it. So you'll see why that shading and that sun exposure is so important. So here's our Santa Rosa plum, just to give you an idea of a tree, let's say, that is very vigorous. Let's say that I planted these both at the same time. This tree, being so much more vigorous and such a more established tree, is going to shade out this pluot, this emerald drop pluot that I want to plant. Or let's just imagine that it was planted. So if I were planting these both at the same time and I had a giant tree like this and a small one like this, I would ideally be planting this one behind this one or north of this one. I would put this one on the other side so that way it was getting as much sun as it needed, and this would obviously get its own sun. as much sun as it needed because it's just so much taller, so much more vigorous. So as you're planting, be aware of the less vigorous variety, the smaller growing variety. You want to be on the south facing side, at least in North America. So a trick that I'm using out here in the hot sun to be able to work out is just getting one of these easy ups. So that way, as I'm digging here, I've kind of marked off with a pine cone and a piece of wood what I need to do, where I need to dig to get that those 2 pluery trees planted. I am pouring with sweat. Even under this easy up, it's like 89 degrees out here. But look at what I dug out of these little holes. So there are the holes. That thing is about the size of like 1.5, 5 gallons. That's about a 15 gallon. Look at that pile of rocks that I took just out of there and just out of there. Unreal, it's like every shovelful has rocks in it. So you might be wondering why I dug that hole as big as I did, given that the 15 gallon behind it, that's like 3-4 times the size of that 15 gallon. And why did I focus on getting all those rocks, and especially that one giant one, out of there? And the reason is because when these trees are young, I want them to have enough room around the roots to be able to get a really strong, firm grip. They will work their ways around the rocks. So that's not the end of the world if there are rocks there. I mean, look at that gigantic Santa Rosa plum. Same exact type of soil, and it's doing great. But what this does is it gives it space to be able to make its way around. They kind of wrap around those rocks, they'll hold on to them. But I wanted to give, at least in the first foot or so of soil, plenty of room for them to kind of make their purchase. Make purchase, whatever it is. So they grow. Okay, so just like we did with the apple, you want to look and see if you're doing like a close planting like I'm doing with these two. You want to make sure that the branches and where it is eventually going to grow, you want to plan that now. So I don't want these growing toward each other and getting entangled. I want them growing out and kind of taking their own equal space, kind of like their own semicircle of space. So if you imagine like an entire canopy of a tree being round, imagine that half of it, like a half of a pizza, being all half of the foliage for one side and half for the foliage of the other side. Hear my little kids over there? They love being out here while we're working on this stuff. I do too. So arrange them before you take them out of the pots. Feel good about how they're going, so once they're in the ground, you don't want to have to redig them up and disturb the roots. That's going to be when the roots get really disturbed, is if you take them out. So again, I've got most of the foliage here kind of growing out. There are a couple things that are growing a little bit in, but we can train that a little. And then this guy, I may rotate this around a little bit, but rotating it in the pot in the ground is a lot easier than once it's already in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is it's time to get these out of the pots into the ground, so that way we can put the soil around it. Now, it's got to get loosened up in here. This tree has been in here for months at the nursery. And so what I'd like to do is kind of put it on its side, roll it a little bit so that the sides it comes off of the sides, almost like when you're taking a fresh baked bread out of a bread pan, similar thing. You want to kind of loosen it up if you can. And so I'm going to roll it around, loosen it up, and then I'm going to guide it into here. In this orientation, I'm thinking that this is going to give me the best outward growth on this. Okay, so something that I've done is I've gone through and I've patted it down, I've stepped on the dirt around it. I've looked from the top to see if it's tilting in any direction. You can't always see it from the side, so looking up from the top allowed me to move it in one direction and kind of pat down the dirt, and that holds it. Something I didn't mention is when you're taking, so these trees are ready to get their mulch layer down. We're gonna put that on, we're gonna water them in, and then these are gonna be good to go. I just need to run a irrigation line out to it and I'll be set. So planting trees is, can seem a little bit complicated, you know, making sure that you get it right, that you dig the hole deep enough, that you deal with rocks and with soil. The thing is, everybody's yard is different and every part of your yard is different. And so really encourage you, if you're gonna get out there, just pay attention to a few things that are gonna really help you. Dig the hole twice as big, deep and wide as the container that the tree is in. Mulch 2 to 4 inches above that. You see that mulch pile? Speaking of mulch, you can tell I'm into mulch. I've got something the size of a bus. And then after you've got that mulch layer down, make sure that you've got regular irrigation going to that, and you know, that you water that in really well initially, and then, you know, subsequently. These trees are most sensitive for like the first year that they're in the ground. The roots aren't as established and they need a lot more help and attention. Very easy thing to do overall. It doesn't take a ton of time, but they are going to require just a little more attention than one of the more established ones like I've got back here. What kind of questions have you got? What do you want to see me do a video on? What do you wonder about back here besides how to get a totem pole like he's got on the top of his head? Make a comment below or shoot me a message. And yeah, in the meantime, happy gardening.